Can't get enough of Kelly and Ramya?
We're now on YouTube for you to indulge in highlights from our show.
We're going to have a conversation right now with Dr. Philip Semple. He's at the Police Foundation's program at Centennial College, and he's going to actually be presenting some research that he's been working on, some findings at the Altogether Better Health Conference in Qatar. His fascinating research talks about how implicit biases can affect policing and other areas of life. So we're going to go in a few places with this conversation. He's with us right now to share his research with us. Dr. Semple, welcome to the program. Appreciate having you on board.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for sharing this time with me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your work, the role that you do with police foundations at school and so on?
Yeah, so I spent 31 years with the Toronto Police Service as a police officer. And during that time, you come to notice a lot of different things that are going on around you. As I am a Black male in our society here today, and I work with a lot of officers who are really good people and do a good job, yet sometimes still seem to do things that aren't quite appropriate or correct. And it really made me stop to think, like, why? Why does this happen? And that started that journey for me. I did my master's after I started teaching at Centennial College in their Police Foundations program. That's where I went after I retired from the police. And I did that in racial profiling. And then a lot of people were telling me that, you can't just stop there. You have to continue. And if you're going to continue that investigation, you may as well just do the PhD, because it's all going to equal the same thing. And then I went to University of Toronto, and I was able to complete that last November.
And I'm sure you felt that yourself, even as people were telling you, you get into the research, and the more you dig, the more there is to dig about, and really like getting down to the roots of enormous questions like these, like racial bias and like what our relationship is with authority, with police force, and all kinds of implicit bias, et cetera, et cetera. It is a rabbit hole. So can you talk about this research? You talked a little bit about how you got into this type of work, but what were you discovering as you started to research? Is there even a way to kind of, say what it is in such broad terms that you're learning?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, no, absolutely. So what I thought was very interesting was, first of all, like, we tend to talk a lot about race when we talk about implicit bias, and it's not all about race. That is, of course, a big issue. When we start talking about race, of course, racial is a social construct, which is a whole nother discussion on its own.
Right.
But this whole aspect of implicit bias affects so many of us in so many different ways. So when I started the research, I wanted to go to the Ontario Police College and use an implicit bias tool. So if I could back up just a bit, the implicit bias tool I use is called Implicitly. If you Google implicit bias tool, invariably you'll come up with a tool called Project Implicit. That was created out of Harvard by Dr. Grenwald, and it's sort of the one that's the most popular. It was the first one out, but it had a lot of problems. It didn't have construct validity. That's to say, if you took the test one day, took it the next day, you get completely different results.
Oh.
And yeah, and that's very problematic, of course, in this area. So Blanton and Jacquard, they wrote a paper on it describing all of the problems and issues this had. And then Dr. Jones in England, he created a tool, it took him 2 years to do it, that addressed all of those concerns. And he allowed me to use that tool, and that's the tool that I use now. And it has that construct validity. It's a brilliantly designed tool. So what I did is I wanted to take this tool to the Ontario Police College, test the recruits before they started training, and then when they finished their training, and then you could see, like, what's their level of bias going in, what's the level coming out, is it going up, is it going down, and if it's going either direction, then you can start to make some assumptions as to why. Is it the environment that they're in? Is it what they're being taught? Either way, whether it's good or bad, it would be something that's good to know. And it actually took a year just to get permission to go in to do this work. I had actually thought, having been a police officer for 31 years, it would be easy, but it apparently wasn't. I then lost another year because of COVID. It shut down a lot of the colleges. So I went to the RCMP before I got the permission from the Ontario Police College, and with the RCMP, Brenda Lucky was the commander at the RCMP. She was very interested in having this done, and so she gave it to the director of education for them, Dr. Kratzik, and he jumped on it right away. And so we got this put out to the RCMP recruits and their instructors. Now, the interesting thing is, when you do this kind of testing, oftentimes there's a lot of fear. People are afraid of what their results might be.
For sure.
And that's what happened at the OPC. Send it out. I got 0 responses from the recruits and 0 responses from the instructors. Right. So then with the RCMP, although there was a lot of them saying they would like to get it done, only had 34 responses from the recruits and 0 from the instructors.
Wow.
However, and the big however, Inspector Nakani at the RCMP, he put this tool out to people who were applying to be RCMP constables. And within 3 months, we had 5,282 results.
Wow.
Right. So huge, huge secondary data. And that helped drive a lot of the research. The interesting thing is, from 34 is too small a number to generalize about the whole population of the RCMP recruits. But generally speaking, the police recruits tested at lower levels of bias in the general population, which is a good thing to know. And it's too bad it couldn't be publicized as that. Still, with the 5,282 applicants, and then you have to keep in mind that all the people who are going to be recruits will come from that pool, although not all members of that pool will become recruits. The results still are very positive in favor of what they're doing and how they're trying to go about it.
It's biases for me are such a funny thing, because we all feel, all know we have them towards certain things. We've all built them through life and life experiences. We sometimes know that I know that's not right, and we connect it so much to racial, and that's where people will say, well, I don't want to take a test like that, or I don't want to know because I don't want to tilt things or to find out that I have biases against or for somebody. But yet we apply it to so many things in life, whether you're a writer creating characters for a story, or you start trying to predict people's behavior. And it doesn't mean be for criminal use or anything like that, or legal use, just what we consider those, as we like to say a lot of time as we go far enough, stereotypes. And when you're doing research like this, Dr. Semple, it's pretty, I can see how come there would be inconsistencies and why the tool would have been needed. Don't know what you might want to add to that, but when you're ready, can you also talk a little bit about how this rolled all in gets into the presentation that you're going to be giving in Qatar?
Right, certainly. So the really positive news is that the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police are very engaged in talking about using this tool, and the RCMP have already started using it at Depot. So yeah, I was very, very pleased to see even before the paper was published. Yeah.
Oh, we need it. We need it, especially as diverse as this country is.
Absolutely, it's hugely diverse. And an interesting point that you raise is the area of bias that most often shows up is age and weight. Right, age bias and weight bias are the two areas that have the most presence in our society. You were mentioning about the Qatar presentation. So it's called the Altogether Better Health Conference, and it's going to be held in Qatar this year in November. I was able to present once before when it was in New Zealand, and again in Banff, Alberta. So this will be my third time attending the conference. It's probably the largest in the world, and it's primarily focused at medical and health professionals, because they recognize how much of an impact bias has on the way they interact with their patients and even with each other. But it also is focused a lot on interprofessional education. That is, people in different professional areas getting together to share models of best practice, right, while they advocate better health and well-being. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are also a major part of what they do at that conference.
I mean, it makes so much sense that you would take a tool like this, start the learning process somewhere fair and equitable, and then be able to utilize this research, cross-connect it, throughout society, throughout different sectors of issues and challenges that we have when interacting with each other, and then take it back, right? Not just take it forward, but take it back to find out some of the roots of where these things come from. I'm imagining it's very complex, though, to cross-reference and to cross-connect and to determine really, where are these biases coming from, how they actually impact society, and to trace it back enough. Would you say it's impossible, or would you say we're getting somewhere with this tool to do that?
I definitely think we're getting somewhere. When I'm working with a company, TNT, Justice Consultants, and what we do with that is we take the tool, and all it's doing is allowing you to see where your biases may lie, right? So everybody has bias, right? I mean, that's
Right.
first. Bias is simply preferences, right? We all have biases. The problem comes when those biases you're in a position of power and they can affect people that you're working with, whether it's in the law
Right.
system, whether it's a police officer or whatever. I think one of the biggest ways these microaggressions can show themselves would be in conformity bias. So let's say, for example, you're a manager and you have two employees. And this applies with the manager or the employees. Okay, so you're a manager, you have two employees. A, you like, B, not so much. You give them both exactly the same task. They both fail at the task. They both fail. When you do the evaluation on A, the one you have a bias in favor of, you tend to externalize the failure, right? So you say, oh, it was a really hard task. Nobody could have done that well. It's no wonder it's not their fault. The person you don't like so much or have a bias against, you internalize that result. I knew they couldn't do it. I don't know why I ever gave it to them in the first place. They just proved they weren't capable.
Problematic.
Problematic.
Yep.
Take the same manager, same two employees. This time they both succeed. The one that you have the bias in favor of, you internalize the success. I knew they were a superstar. They were great. They just proved it. The one that you don't like as much or have a bias against, you externalize the success. Oh, it was an easy task. Anybody could have done that. It's no big deal.
Right. Yep.
So just because of the bias in the evaluator, right, you have completely different results for exactly the same thing that's being done by both parties. So whether you're being evaluated, it's good to know that kind of thing could be happening to you if you notice that your colleagues or peers are getting opposite evaluations for doing exactly the same work. Or if you're a manager,
And
you want to know that you
and that's
don't
the
do
vital
that to people.
And that's the vital information for yourself to say, hey, whoa, stop. I caught myself doing that. Or, that's a step forward of something so positive for us to work with. We have about a minute. Can you tell us a little bit then going forward how this research is going to be used in your mind and what you feel in a sense of the lessons learned, like what you just said? It's an amazing thing to stop and say, yeah. And it's not to beat anyone up, but it's to help yourself say, no, that's not the way to look at it.
Yeah, thank you for raising that point, because that is a perfect way to conclude. We've been having great success with different ministries in the government and the police services, like through the Ontario Association of Police Chiefs of Police. The point is, if you're aware, you can do something about it. You don't know what you don't know. And if you're not aware that you might have a bias in an area, then you won't know to look out for it. Anyone who does more than 4 or 5 of these tests will come up with an elevated level of bias somewhere. It's just human nature. And I know for myself, I did this, and it wasn't until I was on a Zoom call that I had done a test and it said I had an elevated level of bias. And I said, there's no way. I treat everybody the same. Everybody's equal, right? And on this call, there was a person in the bottom right corner that fit this demographic. And when they made a comment, I said to myself, oh, that's an intelligent comment. And for me, that was an aha moment.
Right.
Had I not done the test before, I wouldn't have known to recognize it when I made that comment in my mind. It's because I had a bias against that demographic, and therefore I need to do something about it. And then there are all kinds of tools you can use to mitigate it. Treat them the same. Don't do microaggressions. Pay attention to what they're saying. Don't talk over them. All things like that.
Wow. And it is so much of your own work, homework, and growth that this takes to do it. And we're going to be so much better for it. Doctor, good luck in Qatar. Good luck going forward. Thank you for this tool. And I'm so happy you have so many of these players, the police chiefs that are interested, and people at least willing to say about themselves, I have a bias here, I have a bias there, or catch themselves. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for watching.
You can catch Kelly and Ramya weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern on AMI.